Hey there, take a look around your city. You ever see one of those beautiful old buildings, maybe a little worn down, and wonder, what's going to happen to it? Is it going to get knocked down for a shiny new tower, or will someone fight to save it? That's the huge question cities everywhere are facing, and today we're going to dive into the really high-stakes choices that shape the very places we call home.
And this, right here, this is the central dilemma, isn't it? Just picture it. A block of old buildings, full of character, but, they're starting to weaken. So do you bring in the wrecking ball and make way for something modern, something efficient? Or do you fight to save the history that's literally carved into those walls? There is absolutely no easy answer here.
It really boils down to two totally different ways of thinking. On one side, you've got renewal. The idea of a fresh start, wiping the slate clean and building for the future. And on the other side, you've got conservation, this deep belief that our past is worth saving, that our heritage is a treasure we have to protect.
All right, so let's start with renewal. If a city decides, okay, it's time for a big change, what tools does it actually have in its playbook?
Urban renewal is kind of the big catch-all term for when a city decides to give a struggling neighborhood a second shot. We're talking about areas with crumbling buildings, maybe empty storefronts, just a general feeling of decay. But how do you actually bring a place like that back to life? Well, there are a couple of different ways to go about it.
So, what does this renewal process actually look like on the ground? Well, you've got two main moves. Redevelopment is the most drastic one. You tear it all down and start from scratch. This is what you do when buildings are just flat out unsafe. Then there's rehabilitation, which is more like a major makeover. The building's bones are good, the structure is solid, but it needs a serious upgrade to be useful again.
But here's where it gets really complicated. When you change the buildings, you almost always change the people. Renewing a neighborhood isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about the lives of the people who are already there. And that brings us to a word that, well, it tends to spark a lot of debate.
Gentrification. Yeah, that's the one. It's a word that can bring up some really strong feelings. On the surface, it's about new investment and new people moving into a neighborhood, which leads to renovated buildings and trendy new businesses. But just beneath that shiny surface, it's a process that can completely change a community's soul. And this is the critical point. Gentrification is a classic double-edged sword. The upsides can be very real for sure. Buildings get restored, crime rates might go down, and the city gets a boost in tax money. But the flip side, the major consequence, is often displacement. As rents and property taxes shoot up, the original residents, who are often on lower incomes, simply can't afford to live in their own neighborhood anymore.
So that's one path, the path of rebuilding. But what if a city chooses the other way? What if the main goal is to save that piece of history, instead of just erasing it? Let's look at the different ways a city can go about protecting its heritage.
First up, you've got preservation. Honestly, this is kind of like hitting the pause button on a building. The whole goal is to just stop time to keep everything exactly as it is right now. You're not trying to change it or improve it, you're just focused on preventing any more decay.
Restoration is a little different. Think of this more like taking a building on a trip back in time. You're trying to make it look exactly like it did at one specific moment in its history. And that might even mean stripping away additions or changes that were made later on.
Okay, but what happens when the original building is already gone, like completely lost? That's where reconstruction comes in. Imagine a historic site that was destroyed in a fire or a war. Reconstruction is when you use old plans, photos, and records to build a brand new, faithful replica from scratch. It's a tribute to what used to be there.
And then there's this one, which is really cool. Adaptive reuse. This is all about giving old buildings a new purpose, a new lease on life. You take a historic structure, you keep all its unique character, but you give it a totally new job to do. It's how we make sure our history stays a living, breathing part of our cities today.
I mean, you've definitely seen this in action. You know that old warehouse on the waterfront that's now a brewery? Or that abandoned church that's been turned into a cool music venue? Yep, that's adaptive reuse. It's all about finding really creative ways to make old buildings useful again.
Okay, so we've got all these options, right? From demolition to this clever adaptive reuse. But who actually decides? And how do they make that call? These aren't just random choices people are making. They're guided by a whole set of ethical principles and, in many cases, some very strict laws.
To help guide these massive decisions, there are these international agreements, called charters, that basically set out the best practices for handling historic places. You can think of them as a kind of moral compass for the whole conservation world, making sure our shared heritage gets treated with the respect it deserves.
The two big ones you always hear about are the Venice and Borough charters. The Venice Charter from back in 1964 is really focused on the physical building, the historic monument. Its golden rule is authenticity. Any new work you do has to be clearly different from the old stuff. You don't try to fake history. But then the Borough Charter came along in '79 and kind of broadened the perspective. It focuses less on just the bricks and mortar and more on the place and its cultural significance, what it means to the community.
But, these big international ideas are one thing. How do they actually work on the ground, in the real world? Well, they have to be translated into local rules. And a fantastic example of this is the heritage grading system they use in India, which is basically a way of ranking old buildings by how important they are.
And this system creates a really clear set of rules. Grade I buildings, these are national treasures. Absolutely no changes allowed, period. Grade 2 buildings are important to their region. You have to protect the outside, but you're allowed to make changes inside, which makes them perfect for that adaptive reuse we talked about. And then you have Grade 3 buildings. These just contribute to the overall feel of a street. Here, demolition might actually be okay, but only if the new building fits in with the area's character.
And for the most important sites of all, there's a really powerful law in India. It's called the Ancient Monuments and Archaeological Sites and Remains Act. Yeah, it's a mouthful, so everybody just calls it the AMSR Act. And this law creates a serious protective shield around the country's most precious heritage.
Here's how it works. First, there's a 100-meter ring around the monument. This is called the prohibited area. And they mean prohibited. Inside this zone, you are allowed 0 new construction. It is a hard stop, designed to protect the site's immediate surroundings.
And it doesn't stop there. Beyond that first ring, there's a second one that extends for another 200 meters. This is the regulated area. Now here, building isn't banned completely, but it is heavily restricted. You need all kinds of special permission. It basically acts as a critical buffer zone.
So now you've got the whole framework. You know the tools, you know the potential consequences, and you know the rules of the game. The next time you walk through your city and you see a crane looming over a historic neighborhood or scaffolding wrapped around an old facade, you'll be able to see beyond just the construction dust. You'll know the right questions to ask. Is this progress? Is it preservation? Or is it displacement? The choices are shaping the future of our cities, one building at a time.